I still remember the knot in my stomach as I pulled into the parking lot of Westfield High School that afternoon. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as I found a spot near the gymnasium entrance. I hadn't set foot in this building since I was 16, and honestly, I never thought I would again. But today was different. Today was about my younger sister Emma, and there was no way I was going to miss her receiving the academic excellence award she had worked so hard for. You see, I left Westfield High during my sophomore year, and it wasn't exactly a graceful exit. While my classmates were worried about prom dates and SAT scores, I was fielding calls from venture capitalists and trying to figure out how to scale a tech company that had somehow grown from a bedroom coding project into something worth millions. But I never told anyone back home about any of that. The people who had made my life miserable during those early high school years didn't deserve to know about my success. I kept everything quiet, let them think whatever they wanted to think. As I walked through those familiar double doors, the smell hit me first. That unique combination of floor wax, cafeteria food, and teenage anxiety that every high school seems to have. The gymnasium was already filling up with proud parents, excited students, and faculty members setting up for the ceremony. I tried to blend in, wearing a simple navy blazer and jeans, hoping to just find a seat in the back and watch Emma receive her award without drawing any attention to myself. But of course, life doesn't work that way, does it? I was barely 10 feet into the gym when I spotted them near the refreshment table. Ms. Harrison, my old history teacher, was holding court with a group of other faculty members I recognized all too well. Mr. Peterson from the math department, Ms. Chen from English, and several others who had made it abundantly clear that they thought I was throwing my life away when I left. I turned slightly, hoping to avoid their line of sight, but it was too late. Ms. Harrison's eyes locked onto mine, and I watched her expression transform from casual conversation to something that made my stomach drop. Her face twisted with what I can only describe as disgust mixed with a kind of vindictive pleasure, like a cat that had just spotted a mouse it had been hunting for years. The conversation at their little group stopped abruptly as she set down her cup of punch with deliberate slowness. I could see her saying something to the others, and one by one, they all turned to stare at me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Ms. Harrison began walking toward me, her heels clicking against the polished floor with each purposeful step. Well, she said, loud enough that several nearby parents turned to look. Her voice carried that same condescending tone I remembered from years of classes where she'd made it clear she thought some students were destined for greatness, and others were just taking up space. If it isn't our little dropout, I'm surprised they even let you through the doors. I felt my cheeks burn as more people turned to watch the interaction. Parents I didn't know, some teachers I vaguely recognized, and worst of all, a few students who were probably Emma's classmates. I tried to keep my voice steady and calm as I responded that I was just there to support my sister. Ms. Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. Support her? Oh, that's rich. You know what would have supported her? Having a sister who actually finished her education instead of becoming a cautionary tale? She looked me up and down with obvious disdain, taking in my appearance like she was cataloging every perceived flaw. Still dressing like you're trying to be younger than you are, I see. That's what happens when you stop maturing at 16. The other teachers had started moving closer, forming a semicircle that effectively trapped me between them and a table full of folding chairs. Mr. Peterson joined in immediately, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. I remember when you sat in my calculus class, he said. You had such potential, mathematical ability that could have taken you places. But you thought you knew better than all of us, didn't you? Thought you were too special for something as mundane as a high school diploma. I tried to explain that I was doing well, that leaving had been the right choice for me, but he cut me off with a harsh laugh. Doing well? What does that even mean coming from someone like you? You probably consider it a good month if you can make rent and keep the lights on. Is that what you tell yourself when you see your former classmates graduating from college, starting careers, making something of themselves? Ms. Chen from the English department stepped forward, and I noticed she was holding a red cup of punch that seemed to slosh dangerously as she gestured. You know what the real tragedy is? She said, her voice dripping with false concern. It's not just that you ruined your own life, it's that your poor sister has to live in your shadow. The shadow of failure. Every teacher in this school knows Emma as the girl whose sister couldn't hack it. The girl whose sister ran away when things got tough. I felt something inside me shift from embarrassment to anger. These people knew nothing about my life, nothing about what I'd accomplished, nothing about the company I'd built from scratch. But before I could respond, Principal Roberts appeared, and I actually felt a moment of relief thinking he might diffuse the situation. That relief was short-lived. "Ms. Harrison, Mr. Peterson," he said with a nod to the teachers before turning to me with a look of such contempt, it actually made me take a step back. "I heard we had an unwelcome visitor. Security mentioned someone who looked out of place was wandering the halls. Now I understand their concern." The small crowd that had gathered seemed to press closer, and I could hear whispers rippling through the group. "Is that really her? The one who dropped out? I heard she got into drugs." "No, I heard she got pregnant. My mom said she saw her working at the gas station on Route 9. Principal Roberts continued, raising his voice slightly as if giving a presentation. "This is exactly why we have our students sign commitment contracts now. So they understand that education is not something you can just walk away from when it gets difficult or when you think you found an easier path." He turned to address the growing audience of parents. "This young woman sitting before you is what happens when children are allowed to make life-altering decisions based on adolescent whims. She threw away her future because she thought she was above the system." My phone buzzed in my pocket with a work notification, probably Marcus, my CTO, with an update about the new feature launch we had scheduled for next week. Without thinking, I pulled it out to quickly check the message. Ms. Harrison's hand shot out faster than I would have thought possible for someone her age, snatching the phone from my grip. "Oh, let's see what's so important that you can't even pay attention when your betters are trying to help you understand your mistakes," she said, holding my phone up to read the notification. Her face changed as she read, and then she let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, this is precious. Listen to this, everyone. She's apparently listed in someone's phone as CEO. Is that what you're calling yourself these days? Chief Executive Officer of what? Your parents' basement?" The crowd laughed, and I watched in horror as she fumbled with my phone, her contempt making her careless. The device slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a sickening crack. The screen spiderwebbed instantly, going dark except for a few flickering pixels in the corner. "Oops," she said with false sweetness as she looked down at the damaged phone. "But I'm sure someone in your position can easily afford a new one, right, CEO? Or will you need to pick up extra shifts at whatever minimum wage job you're pretending is a career?" Mr. Peterson decided this was the perfect moment to address the entire reception area. His teacher voice carried easily across the gym as more and more people stopped their conversations to listen. "Parents and students, I want you to look carefully at what you're seeing here. This is what we educators call a teachable moment. This young woman had every opportunity to succeed. She sat in our classrooms, had access to our knowledge and guidance, and what did she do? She threw it all away." He pointed at me like I was some kind of exhibit in a museum of failure. "Your children might be tempted sometimes to think they don't need their education, that they can make it without putting in the hard work. Well, here's your proof of where that thinking leads. When I see former students like this, it breaks my heart. All that wasted potential, all those squandered opportunities, all because she thought she was special enough to play by different rules." The humiliation was overwhelming. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. I bent down to pick up my broken phone, my hands shaking as I tried to gather the pieces of the screen protector that had shattered. Miss Chen stepped closer, and I noticed she had moved to stand between me and the nearest exit. "You know what your problem always was?" she said, her voice taking on a philosophical tone like she was delivering one of her famous classroom lectures. "You never understood the value of structure, of following the path that generations before you have proven works. You thought you could just forge your own way, but look where that's gotten you." She gestured around the gym at the successful-looking parents, the bright-eyed students, the general atmosphere of achievement and promise. Everyone here followed the rules. They graduated, they went to college, they got jobs, they contributed to society. And what have you contributed? What legacy will you leave behind, except as a warning to other students who might be tempted to follow your example? I tried once more to extract myself from the situation, saying I really needed to find a seat before the ceremony started, but Principal Roberts blocked my path. "Oh, I don't think so," he said. "You see, this event is for students, graduates, and their families. You're none of those things anymore. You gave up the right to be here when you gave up on your education. In fact, I'm not even sure how you got past security. We've tightened our procedures specifically to keep out people who don't belong. The math teacher pulled out his phone and started typing. "I should probably alert security now," he said. "We can't have non-graduates wandering around, potentially influencing current students with their poor life choices. What kind of message does it send to allow failures to mingle with achievers?" That's when I noticed several parents had their phones out, and the sickening realization hit me that they were recording this entire interaction. I could already imagine the videos being shared in local parent Facebook groups, being discussed over coffee tomorrow morning. Local dropout returns to school, gets put in her place by teachers. I felt nauseated. Ms. Harrison stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of the punch she'd been drinking. "You smell like disappointment," she said quietly, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. It's a particular smell I've learned to recognize over my years of teaching. The smell of someone who gave up, who took the easy way out, who will spend the rest of their life wondering what could have been if they just had the strength to stick it out. She raised her voice again, playing to her audience. "I remember the day you left. You walked out of my classroom in the middle of a lesson about perseverance, ironically enough. I told the other students that day that they were witnessing what giving up looks like. I've used you as an example every year since then. When students complain that school is too hard or that they don't see the point, I tell them about you, about how you thought you were too good for education and where it led you." The English teacher pulled something from her bag, and I realized with growing alarm that it was a pair of scissors. "You know," she said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather, "looking at you now, I can see that everything about you is unkempt, unfinished. Your clothes, your hair, your life choices. It all speaks to a lack of discipline, a fundamental inability to commit to anything properly." Before I could react, before I could step back or protect myself, she reached out and grabbed a section of my hair. The scissors flashed, and I felt the tug as she cut through a chunk near my ear. The severed strands fell to the gym floor, and I stood there in shock as she examined her handiwork. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Now your outside matches your inside. Broken, uneven, incomplete. Maybe this will serve as a reminder that there are consequences to every choice you make, and some choices mark you forever." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some gasped at the sudden physical escalation, while others actually applauded. I heard someone mutter that it was about time someone taught me a lesson. Another parent said loudly that this was what tough love looked like, and that maybe if someone had been this firm with me earlier, I wouldn't have ruined my life. Ms. Harrison picked up her cup of punch from where she'd set it on a nearby table. "You know what?" she said, swirling the red liquid thoughtfully. "I just realized something. You came here thinking you could blend in, thinking you could pretend to be one of us, one of the successful people. But you can't wash off failure. It stains you." And with that, she upended the entire cup over my head. The cold, sticky liquid poured down my face, into my eyes, dripping from my chin onto my blazer. The bright red punch soaked through my white shirt underneath, spreading like blood across the fabric. The smell of artificial fruit flavoring mixed with sugar was overwhelming. The shock of it, the sheer audacity of a teacher assaulting a visitor in front of dozens of witnesses, left me speechless. But Ms. Harrison wasn't done. As I stood there dripping, trying to process what had just happened, she pulled back her hand and slapped me across the face. The crack of palm against cheek echoed through the gymnasium. "That's for wasting 2 years of my life trying to educate someone who was too stupid to accept the gift being offered?" she spat. "That's for every essay I graded, every lesson I planned, every moment I spent believing you might amount to something. You stole those resources from students who actually deserved them, who actually made something of themselves." Principal Roberts grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "All right, that's enough," he said, but he was looking at me, not at the teachers who had just assaulted me. "You've disrupted this event enough. You're leaving. Now." When I tried to pull away, to protest that I'd done nothing wrong, that I was here for my sister, his grip tightened. He started dragging me toward the exit, and I stumbled, my shoes slipping on the punch that was now puddling on the floor. "Don't make me call the police," he warned. "Trespassing is a criminal offense. How do you think your sister will feel when they arrest you at her award ceremony? When she has to watch her dropout sister get hauled away in handcuffs? Is that the memory you want to give her of this day?" Mr. Peterson added one final insult as they shepherded me toward the door. "The saddest part of all this," he said, his voice full of false pity, "is that you probably tell yourself you made the right choice. You probably have some sad little story you've constructed about how leaving school was actually brave or smart or necessary. But everyone in this room knows the truth. You're a cautionary tale, nothing more. A waste of potential who will spend the rest of her life serving coffee to the classmates who actually finished what they started. Ms. Chen nodded in agreement. Your sister must be so ashamed. I've seen her in the halls, always working harder than everyone else, always trying to prove she's not like you. The poor girl probably tells people you moved away or that you're sick rather than admit her sister is a dropout who couldn't handle sophomore geometry. Just as we reached the doors, just as I thought this nightmare was about to end with me being thrown out into the parking lot, I heard a voice that made my heart simultaneously soar and sink. What the hell is going on here? Emma stood there in her cap and gown, her academic excellence medal gleaming on its ribbon around her neck. She must have just finished taking photos with the other award recipients. Her face went from confusion to horror as she took in the scene, me covered in punch with a chunk of my hair missing, surrounded by teachers who were still gripping my arms. She pushed through them without hesitation, grabbing my hand and pulling me away from Principal Roberts. Her eyes blazed with a fury I'd never seen in my usually calm, collected sister. Are you seriously assaulting my sister at my award ceremony? She looked at each teacher in turn, her voice rising. Is this what you do to visitors? Is this how professionals behave? Ms. Harrison tried to regain control of the situation. Emma, dear, you don't understand. We were just trying to help your sister understand the consequences of her choices. Sometimes tough love is necessary. Emma laughed, but it was sharp and bitter. Tough love? You poured a drink on her head, you cut her hair, you hit her. That's not tough love, that's assault. And you did it in front of dozens of witnesses who were apparently just fine watching it happen. She turned to me, her eyes softening. Tell them, she said quietly but firmly. Tell them about your company. Tell them what you've actually been doing since you left this place. The gymnasium had gone dead silent. Every eye was on us, waiting. I could feel the punch still dripping from my hair, could feel the sting where Miss Harrison had slapped me. Part of me wanted to just leave, to let them think whatever they wanted. But Emma squeezed my hand harder, and I saw in her eyes not just anger, but pride. Pride in me, in what I'd built, in who I'd become despite what these people thought. I looked around the room at the teachers who had just spent the last 20 minutes trying to destroy me, at the parents who had watched and done nothing, at the students who would probably remember this day for years. And I made a choice. Listen, I started, my voice shaky but getting stronger. I really think we should have this conversation somewhere more private. This is Emma's day, and I don't want to make it about me. But the teachers weren't having it. Ms. Harrison rolled her eyes dramatically. Of course you want to slink away now. Typical behavior from someone who runs from every challenge. Can't even face up to your failures publicly. Mr. Peterson joined in. More private, so you can spin some fantasy about how successful you are without any accountability? No, I think everyone here deserves to hear whatever excuse you've prepared for throwing your life away. I bent down slowly to pick up my shattered phone, trying to salvage what I could. The screen was completely destroyed, barely responding to touch. Emma immediately grabbed the chunk of hair that Ms. Chen had cut off and shoved it into her pocket, giving the English teacher a look that could have melted steel. Several parents still had their phones out, recording everything. I could see the headlines already. Local teachers discipline dropout at school event? Or maybe high school dropout gets reality check from former teachers. I knew that whatever happened next would be all over social media within hours. Emma practically dragged me toward the exit, keeping herself between me and the teachers like a protective barrier. As we pushed through the gym doors into the parking lot, I could hear the buzz of conversation erupting behind us. The ceremony hadn't even started yet, and already it would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. My sister led me to her Honda Civic, helping me into the passenger seat before running around to the driver's side. She locked the doors immediately and turned to face me, her face a mixture of rage and shock. I can't believe that just happened, she said, her voice trembling. I cannot believe they did that to you, in front of everyone. And people just watched? She pulled some napkins from her center console and started dabbing at my face, trying to clean off some of the punch. Your beautiful blazer is ruined. Oh my God, and your hair. She gently touched the area where the chunk had been cut. We need to get you to a salon to fix this. I finally found my voice. Emma, you should go back. This is your day. You worked so hard for that award, and I don't want to ruin it. She gave me a look that was so fierce it actually made me smile despite everything. Are you insane? You think I'm going to go back in there and accept an award from people who just assaulted my sister? Who humiliated you for absolutely no reason except their own sick satisfaction? Absolutely not. She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. As we drove, she kept glancing over at me, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I made you come. I'm sorry I didn't tell them about your success sooner. I've been watching you build something incredible for years, keeping your secret because you asked me to. But maybe if I'd told people, if they'd known." I interrupted her. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. Those people, they've always been like that. Even when I was a student, they had their favorites and the ones they'd written off. I was never going to be good enough for them, no matter what I achieved." We drove to my apartment in silence after that. Emma insisted on coming up, helping me out of my ruined clothes and into something comfortable while I washed the sticky punch out of my hair. She sat on my couch while I showered, and I could hear her on the phone, though I couldn't make out what she was saying. When I came out, toweling my hair dry and trying not to think about the uneven chunk missing from one side, she was pacing my living room with a determination I recognized. It was the same look she got when she was solving a particularly difficult problem or fighting for something she believed in. "Okay," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking. What happened today wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. They assaulted you. There are dozens of witnesses. There's probably video from multiple angles. We can't let them get away with this." I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "Emma, I just want to forget this happened. I don't want to make it worse." She sat down next to me, taking my hands in hers. "Listen to me. Really listen. You've spent years building something amazing while letting people like them think you're a failure. You've protected everyone else's feelings, kept quiet about your success, made yourself small so others could feel big. But what they did today, that crossed every line. And if we don't do something about it, they'll do it to someone else. Some other kid who doesn't fit their mold, who takes a different path." I knew she was right. The anger that I'd pushed down in the gymnasium was starting to bubble up. Not just anger for myself, but for every kid who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't smart enough, weren't following the right path. "What they don't know," Emma continued, "is that my brilliant sister, who they just humiliated in front of everyone, is the CEO and founder of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. They don't know that the dropout they were mocking has a net worth that would make their jaws drop. They don't know that the failure they were so eager to punish just closed a Series B funding round that valued her company at over $100 million. I looked at my sister, this fierce defender who'd given up her own award ceremony to stand by me. "You really think I should tell them? After all this time?" She smiled, and it was slightly wicked. "Oh, I don't think you should tell them. I think you should show them, and I think you should do it in a way that creates real change, not just personal vindication. Use what happened today to make sure no other student or visitor ever gets treated like that again." As I sat there in my apartment, hair still damp and uneven, the ghost of punch still lingering despite the shower, I made a decision. It was time to stop hiding. Time to stop protecting people who'd never protected me. Time to use my success not just for building a company, but for building something better at the school I'd left behind. I picked up my laptop and opened my email, typing a message to my lawyer. The subject line was simple: urgent, need to discuss assault at Westfield High School. As I typed out the basic details of what had happened, I felt something shift inside me. The shame and humiliation were transforming into something else. Purpose. Emma watched me work, a small smile playing on her lips. "There she is," she said quietly. "There's the sister who built a company from nothing, who convinced investors to believe in her vision, who manages a team of 40 brilliant people. There's the CEO they tried to tear down." By the time I finished sending emails and making initial calls, the sun was setting. Emma and I ordered takeout and spent the evening planning our next steps. She showed me her phone, where she'd already received dozens of messages from classmates and parents who'd witnessed what happened. Many were expressing shock and support, saying they couldn't believe teachers had acted that way. "You know what the ironic part is?" I said, picking at my pad thai. "If they just ignored me, if they just let me watch you get your award and leave, none of this would have happened. I would have kept their secret, kept protecting them from their own prejudices. But they couldn't help themselves. They had to try to humiliate someone they saw as beneath them. Emma raised her bottle of water in a mock toast. To the teachers of Westfield High, she said, who just learned that sometimes the dropout you mock might be the one holding all the cards. The next morning came faster than I expected. I woke up to my phone ringing, the replacement I'd had to activate after Ms. Harrison destroyed my other one. It was Marcus, my CTO, and he sounded concerned. "Hey, so, weird question," he started. "But why is there a video of you getting assaulted by teachers trending on local social media? And why didn't you tell me you were some kind of high school dropout success story? This is like the ultimate tech entrepreneur narrative, and you've been hiding it?" I groaned, pulling up Twitter on my laptop. Sure enough, there were multiple videos from different angles. The punch pour was the most shared clip, but the hair cutting had its own viral moment. The comments were a mix of outrage at the teachers and surprise at learning about my company. "Local tech CEO assaulted by former teachers" was one headline. Another read, "Dropout worth millions gets punched by educator." The story was spreading faster than I could have imagined. I called an emergency meeting with my leadership team. If this was going to be public, we needed to control the narrative. My head of PR, Janet, was practically vibrating with a mix of concern and excitement. "Okay, so this is a crisis, but also an opportunity," she said, pulling up her laptop. "We can either try to minimize this, hope it blows over, or we can lean into it. Tell your story on your terms. Show how building unconventional paths to success is literally what our company is about." I thought about all the years I'd hidden my background, all the energy I'd spent keeping my success separate from my hometown. And I thought about Emma's words the night before, about using this to create real change. We lean into it, I decided, but we do it strategically. This isn't about revenge or humiliation. It's about highlighting how broken the one-size-fits-all education model is. It's about creating opportunities for kids who don't fit the traditional mold. The next few days were a whirlwind. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, no relation to the English teacher who'd cut my hair, was a force of nature. She'd handled discrimination cases against major corporations, and she was genuinely appalled by what had happened. What's particularly egregious, she explained during our strategy meeting, is that this happened at a school event, perpetrated by authority figures who are supposed to be protecting and nurturing students. The fact that they felt comfortable physically assaulting you in front of dozens of witnesses suggests a culture of impunity that needs to be addressed. She'd already sent a formal letter to the school district demanding a response. We had witness statements from 12 parents who'd seen everything, plus the video evidence. But I wasn't interested in just getting the teachers fired. I wanted something bigger. What if I proposed we used any settlement to create a scholarship fund, specifically for students who want to pursue non-traditional paths? Kids who might be brilliant programmers or artists or entrepreneurs, but who struggle in traditional academic settings. Patricia's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. It turns a negative story into a positive outcome. And it puts pressure on the district to not just punish the bad actors, but to actually examine their culture and policies. Meanwhile, the story had caught the attention of a local reporter named Sarah Martinez, who specialized in education reporting. She reached out wanting to do a deeper piece, not just about the assault, but about the larger issues of educational rigidity and alternative paths to success. I agreed to the interview on the condition that she also talked to current students who felt trapped by the traditional system. Emma helped connect her with several of her classmates who were struggling with the college or failure mentality that permeated the school. The day of the interview, I sat in my office, looking out at the city skyline. My company, TechBridge Solutions, occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming downtown building. We'd started in my childhood bedroom and grown to this. The reporter seemed impressed. "So tell me," Sarah began, "when did you know that traditional education wasn't the right path for you?" I thought back to those days when I was 15, staying up until 3 a.m. coding, then dragging myself to first period calculus where Mr. Peterson would drone on about derivatives while I could barely keep my eyes open. I'd already been selling small apps online, making more money than some of my teachers, but I couldn't tell anyone. I think it was when I realized I was learning more from online coding communities and YouTube tutorials than I was from my computer science class, I explained. The curriculum was at least 5 years behind current technology. I was building neural networks at home while we were learning basic HTML in class. The disconnect was impossible to ignore. Sarah nodded, taking notes. "And when you made the decision to leave?" "That was harder. The actual moment came when a venture capital firm offered me a significant investment, but only if I could commit full time to the company. I was 16, sitting in the principal's office with my parents, trying to explain why I needed to leave. Principal Roberts, the same man who dragged me out of the gym, had told my parents I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I'd end up poor and regretful. My parents, to their credit, had supported me, though I knew they were terrified. My dad had worked in a factory his whole life. My mom was a nurse. They'd saved everything to give their daughters opportunities. And here I was, seemingly throwing mine away. The interview went on for 2 hours. We talked about building the company, about the challenges of being taken seriously as a teenage CEO, about the imposter syndrome that still sometimes hit when I walked into rooms full of investors twice my age. But we also talked about success, about employing 43 people, about the scholarship program we'd already started for young coders who couldn't afford boot camps. As Sarah was packing up, she asked one last question. If you could talk to those teachers now, what would you say? I thought about it for a long moment. I'd say that they're right about education being important, but they're wrong about there being only one path to it. I learned more in my first year running this company than I would have in a decade of traditional schooling. And the kids they're writing off as failures? Some of them might be the ones who change the world, if given the chance. The article ran 3 days later with the headline, Education's One-Size-Fits-All Failure, How a Local CEO's Assault Highlights Systemic Issues. It was picked up by national outlets within hours. Suddenly, I was getting interview requests from major news networks, invitations to speak at education reform conferences, and messages from hundreds of people sharing their own stories of being failed by the traditional system. But the real action was happening behind the scenes. Patricia had been in negotiations with the school district's legal team. They were initially defensive, trying to minimize what had happened, suggesting it was a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. That changed when Patricia sent them the full video footage, including audio of every horrible thing the teachers had said. She also included statements from current and former students about those same teachers' patterns of humiliation and favoritism in their classrooms. The superintendent called me personally. Ms. Williams, I want to start by saying how appalled I am by what happened. This is not representative of our district's values or policies. We take this extremely seriously. I appreciated her words, but I needed more than apologies. Superintendent Chen, I said, trying not to think about the irony of the shared surname with the teacher who'd cut my hair. What happened to me is a symptom of a larger problem. Your teachers felt comfortable publicly assaulting someone they perceived as a failure? What does that say about how they treat current students who don't fit their mold? She sighed. You're right. We've been reviewing the teachers involved and we're finding some concerning patterns. But I hope we can resolve this without destroying careers or the district's reputation. That's when I laid out my proposal. I wanted a formal apology, yes. I wanted the teachers involved to face consequences, absolutely. But more than that, I wanted structural change. A scholarship fund for non-traditional students. New policies about how staff interact with former students and visitors. Training on alternative paths to success. And I wanted Emma on the committee that would oversee these changes. It took 2 weeks of negotiations, but we reached a settlement. Ms. Harrison, Mr. Peterson, and Ms. Chen would undergo mandatory retraining and counseling. They'd be on probation for 2 years, with any similar incidents resulting in immediate termination. Principal Roberts would be transferred to an administrative role with no direct student contact. The district would pay a substantial settlement, every penny of which would go into the newly created Pathways Scholarship Fund for students pursuing non-traditional education routes. They'd also implement new policies about visitor treatment and create a program where successful professionals from various fields, not just traditional careers, would speak to students. The signing ceremony was held in the same gymnasium where everything had happened. The superintendent had insisted on making it public, turning a negative into a positive for the district. I wore a new blazer, my hair freshly styled to hide the uneven chunk Ms. Chen had cut. As I signed the papers creating the scholarship fund, I noticed Ms. Harrison standing in the back of the room. She'd been required to attend as part of her disciplinary action. Our eyes met across the gymnasium, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. Real, genuine shame. She looked away first. Mr. Peterson approached me after the ceremony. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for that day, but for every time I made a student feel like there was only one path to success. I've been teaching for 23 years, and I've been wrong for most of them. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The apology was unexpected, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. He continued, I've started researching alternative education models. Did you know that some of the most innovative companies in the world were founded by dropouts? That traditional metrics of success often miss the most creative minds? He shook his head. I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my career. How many kids like you did I discourage? How many dreams did I kill? The conversation was interrupted by Emma, who bounded over with a huge smile. She'd been appointed to the scholarship committee, the youngest member by far. She was already full of ideas about how to identify and support students who might benefit. We're going to change things, she said excitedly. Real change. Not just surface-level policy adjustments, but fundamental shifts in how success is defined and measured. The first scholarship recipient was announced 3 months later. Her name was Maria Santos, and she reminded me so much of myself, it was almost painful. 16 years old, brilliant at graphic design and digital art, but struggling with traditional academics. She'd built a following online for her work, had clients paying for commissions, but her guidance counselor kept pushing her toward a traditional 4-year college path that made no sense for her goals. We met for coffee, and I listened to her story. The late nights creating art while her parents worried about her grades, the teachers who saw her tablet and stylus as distractions rather than tools of her trade, the constant message that she was wasting her potential by focusing on digital art instead of traditional subjects. They keep telling me I need a backup plan, she said, frustration evident in her voice. But this isn't a hobby for me. This is my career. I'm already making money, already building a client base. Why should I go into debt for a degree I don't need when I could be growing my business? I smiled, remembering having the exact same thoughts. The scholarship would provide her with funds for professional development, equipment upgrades, and business mentoring. But more importantly, it would validate her path, tell her that success comes in many forms. The ripple effects continued. Other students started reaching out, sharing their stories. Parents began questioning whether pushing their kids toward traditional college was always the right answer. The district started tracking alternative success metrics, not just college acceptance rates, but entrepreneurship, technical certifications, apprenticeships, and creative achievements. 6 months after the incident, I was invited to speak at Westfield High's Career Day. The irony wasn't lost on me. The dropout who'd been physically thrown out was now being welcomed back as a success story. But I agreed, because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the kids sitting in those classrooms who needed to hear that there was more than one way to build a life. I stood in the same gymnasium, looking out at hundreds of young faces. Some looked engaged, some skeptical, some bored. I knew that in that crowd were future entrepreneurs, artists, innovators, and yes, also future doctors, lawyers, and teachers who would thrive in traditional paths. The point was choice. 6 years ago, I made a decision that many people told me would ruin my life. I began. I left this school without graduating. I disappointed teachers, worried my parents, and became what some people saw as a cautionary tale. But I need you to understand something. Leaving was the best decision I ever made, for me. That doesn't mean it's the right decision for you. I talked about building my company, about the failures and successes, about the skills I'd learned that no classroom could have taught me. But I also talked about my employees who'd taken traditional paths and how valuable their formal education was to our success. The point wasn't that one path was better than another, but that there should be multiple paths available. The question and answer session was revealing. Students asked practical questions about starting businesses, about learning to code, about whether college was worth the debt, but they also asked deeper questions about disappointing parents, about facing criticism, about believing in yourself when authority figures don't. One young woman raised her hand. What do you say to teachers who tell us we're wasting our potential if we don't go to college? I thought about Ms. Harrison, Mr. Peterson, all the well-meaning educators who'd tried to force me into a box I didn't fit. I tell them that potential isn't a single track. It's not a ladder with only one way up. Potential is more like a garden. Different plants need different conditions to thrive. Some need traditional soil and careful tending. Others grow wild and free. The waste is not in choosing a different path. It's in forcing everyone down the same one. After the talk, Principal Roberts' replacement, Dr. Williams, pulled me aside. You know, we've implemented more changes since your incident than in the previous decade combined. Our alternative pathway program has identified 43 students who are now pursuing non-traditional post-graduation plans with full support from the school. She showed me data on her tablet. Decreased dropout rates, increased student satisfaction, more diverse post-graduation outcomes. The metrics were impressive, but what really got me were the individual stories. Kids who'd been on the verge of giving up finding new purpose. Parents learning to support dreams they didn't understand. Teachers discovering that success could look different than they'd always believed. As I was leaving, I passed by Ms. Harrison's classroom. She was in there, grading papers. She looked up as I passed, and for a moment, we just looked at each other through the doorway. Then she stood and came to the door. "I've wanted to talk to you," she said quietly. "Really talk, not the forced apology during the settlement. I've been teaching for 27 years, and I thought I knew what success looked like. College, career, house, family, in that order. Anyone who deviated was failing." She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I was wrong, not just about you, but about so many students. I let my rigid worldview damage kids who could have thrived if I'd just seen them for who they were instead of who I thought they should be." I wasn't sure what to say. The woman who'd poured punch over my head, who'd slapped me, who'd tried to humiliate me in the worst way possible, was standing here genuinely grappling with her actions and beliefs. "I can't undo what I did to you," she continued, "but I can change how I teach, how I see students. I've started a podcast, actually, interviewing successful people who took non-traditional paths. Would you consider being a guest? Not to make amends, I know that's not possible, but to help me help current students see possibilities I was too blind to show them before." I told her I'd think about it, and I did. Because change, real change, doesn't come from destroying people who wrong us. It comes from creating systems and cultures where those wrongs become impossible, where a teacher would never feel empowered to humiliate a former student, where success is celebrated in all its forms. A year later, I did appear on her podcast. We talked for 2 hours about education, success, failure, and growth. She asked hard questions, and I gave honest answers. The episode was downloaded over 50,000 times, mostly by educators grappling with their own biases and assumptions. The Pathways Scholarship Fund has now supported 23 students. Maria, our first recipient, just landed a contract with a major gaming company to design characters for their next release. She's 19, making 6 figures, and mentoring other young artists trying to build careers outside traditional structures. Emma graduated as valedictorian, surprising no one. In her speech, she talked about watching her sister build something from nothing, about how success isn't measured in degrees but in impact. She announced she was taking a gap year to work at a nonprofit teaching coding to underserved kids before starting at MIT. I've never been prouder. The videos of my assault still circulate occasionally, usually in discussions about educational reform or as examples of authority figures overstepping bounds. But they've become less about me and more about what they represent. A system that needs to change, assumptions that need to be challenged, and paths that need to be widened. My company continues to grow. We're at 80 employees now, with offices in 3 cities. We've been featured in tech magazines and business journals. But what I'm proudest of is our internship program for non-traditional students. Kids who might not have the grades for top colleges, but have the passion and skill to succeed in tech. Last month, I hired a brilliant developer named James. He dropped out of Westfield High 2 years after I did. Inspired by my story to pursue his passion for coding, Ms. Harrison had been his teacher too. She'd learned from her mistakes with me and had actually encouraged him to follow his dreams. He credits her with giving him the confidence to take the leap. It's funny how things come full circle. The worst day of my return to Westfield High, the day I was humiliated and assaulted, became the catalyst for changes that have helped hundreds of students. The teachers who tried to tear me down ended up being forced to confront their own limitations and biases. The school that had one narrow definition of success now celebrates achievements in all their forms. I still have the blazer I wore that day, punch-stained and ruined, hanging in my closet. Not as a reminder of the humiliation, but as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can become the foundation for the most important changes we make. That sometimes being forced into the light after years of hiding can be exactly what we need, even if we don't choose the circumstances. The scar from where Ms. Chen cut my hair has long since grown out, but I still sometimes catch myself touching that spot when I'm thinking about the past. It reminds me that we all carry marks from the times people tried to cut us down to their size. But those marks don't define us. What we do with the experience, how we grow from it, how we use it to lift others. That's what matters. I think about all the kids still sitting in classrooms being told their dreams aren't valid, their paths aren't legitimate, their versions of success aren't real. And I think about the teachers, some well-meaning, some not, who perpetuate these narrow definitions because it's all they've ever known. Change is slow, but it's happening. One student, one teacher, one school at a time. My phone rings. It's another interview request, another opportunity to share the story, to widen the path a little more. I answer it, ready to talk about alternative education, about the beauty of non-traditional success, about the importance of seeing potential in all its forms. Because that's what leaders do. They take their wounds and turn them into wisdom, their struggles into systems that support others. And somewhere in Westfield High today, a student is probably sitting in class, dreaming of something bigger, something different, something that doesn't fit the traditional mold. But now, instead of being told they're wrong to dream, they might just be handed an application for the Pathways Scholarship. They might be introduced to a mentor who took a different route. They might be told that their potential is valid, whatever form it takes. That's the real victory. Not that I proved my teachers wrong, but that future students won't have to. The system is changing, slowly but surely, to recognize that success has many faces, education has many forms, and potential can bloom in the most unexpected places. All because one day, a group of teachers thought they could humiliate a dropout who refused to be ashamed of the path she'd chosen. The irony is beautiful, really. They wanted to make an example of me. And they did, just not in the way they intended. I became an example of what happens when you try to force people into boxes they don't fit. You don't break them. You teach them to break the boxes instead. And once they start breaking boxes, they often don't stop until they've built something better in their place. Something that has room for everyone, regardless of the path they choose to walk. My story could have ended so many different ways. If the teachers had simply ignored me that day. If I'd never gone to Emma's ceremony. If I'd kept my success hidden forever. But it unfolded exactly as it needed to, with all its pain and humiliation and eventual triumph. Not because I'm special or exceptional, but because I'm proof that there's no single recipe for success, no one-size-fits-all approach to education, no universal timeline for achievement. So here I am, 3 years after that awful day in the gymnasium, running a company valued at over $200 million, employing over 80 people, and most importantly, helping create space for others who don't fit the traditional mold. The teachers who assaulted me have become advocates for educational reform. The school that tried to exclude me now holds me up as a success story. And somewhere out there, a kid who thinks they're not smart enough, not good enough, not traditional enough, is learning that maybe, just maybe, they're exactly enough as they are. They just need to find their own path. And that's really what it's all about. Not revenge or vindication, but transformation. Taking the worst moment and alchemizing it into something that serves others. Using privilege and success not to separate yourself from your community, but to change it for the better. Building bridges where there were walls, creating possibilities where there were only limitations. Every time I drive past Westfield High now, I don't see the place where I was humiliated. I see the place where change began, where a system started to shift, where teachers began to question their assumptions and students began to see new possibilities. It's not perfect, far from it. There's still so much work to do. But it's better than it was, and it's getting better still. And maybe that's the most anyone can hope for. To leave a place a little better than you found it, to create a little more room for others to breathe and grow and become. Even if that process starts with punch in your hair and scissors taken to your dignity. Even if it starts with people trying to make you small. Because the beautiful thing about human potential is that it can't really be destroyed. It can be suppressed, redirected, delayed. But given the chance, it will always find a way to grow. And sometimes it grows strongest in the places where people tried hardest to cut it down. That's my story. A dropout who built something remarkable. Teachers who learned to see beyond their limitations. A school that learned to celebrate more than one kind of success. A scholarship that's changing lives. And proof, living proof, that there's never just one way to reach your dreams. Sometimes the path that looks like failure to everyone else is exactly the one that leads you home. Thanks for being part of this journey with me, for listening to all of this, for understanding why I needed to share every detail, every moment of that day, and what came after. If you've ever been told you're not enough, that your dreams aren't valid, that your path isn't legitimate, I hope you know now that those voices are wrong. Your potential is real, whatever form it takes. Your dreams matter, however unconventional they might be. And your path, the one that's uniquely yours, is exactly the one you should be walking. So walk it proudly. Walk it boldly. And if anyone tries to pour punch on your head for choosing it, remember, sometimes the worst moments become the most powerful catalysts for change. Not just in your own life, but in the lives of everyone who comes after you. That's the real measure of success, not what you achieve for yourself, but what you make possible for others. And by that measure, every single one of us has the potential to be remarkable. Let me share a bit more about what happened in those years following the incident, because I think it's important to understand how deep these changes really went. About 6 months after the podcast with Ms. Harrison aired, I received an unexpected call. It was from Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the new superintendent who had replaced Superintendent Chen after her retirement. She wanted to meet with me about something she called Project Phoenix. I'll be honest, when I walked into the district office that morning, I was skeptical. Too many times, educational initiatives sound great on paper, but fail in execution. But Dr. Martinez had something different in mind. She'd been studying our Pathway Scholarship program and wanted to expand it into something revolutionary for the entire district. Imagine, she said, leaning forward across her desk with an intensity that reminded me of my own passion when pitching to investors. If we could identify these non-traditional learners, not when they're failing, but when they're thriving in their own unique ways. What if we could support them from the beginning instead of waiting for them to struggle against a system that doesn't fit them? She outlined her vision for a parallel track within the traditional school system. Students could still attend regular classes but would have access to mentorship, project-based learning, and real-world experience opportunities. They could earn credits through internships, online courses, creative projects, and entrepreneurial ventures. It wasn't about lowering standards, it was about recognizing different forms of excellence. The pilot program launched the following fall with 50 students across the district. I served on the advisory board along with other successful professionals who had taken non-traditional paths. There was Marcus Thompson, who'd become a renowned chef after dropping out of pre-med. Sarah Kim, who'd built a successful import-export business without finishing her degree. And David Rodriguez, whose carpentry skills had led him to launch a custom furniture company that now shipped worldwide. One of the first students in the program was a kid named Tyler Washington. He reminded me so much of myself at that age, it was almost eerie. Brilliant at coding, terrible at sitting still in traditional classes, constantly in trouble for working on his projects during lectures. His teachers were at their wits' end, and his parents were considering pulling him out to homeschool. But in Project Phoenix, Tyler flourished. He spent mornings in core classes and afternoons at TechBridge, working as a junior developer intern. He earned math credits by building algorithms for our apps, English credits by documenting his code and writing technical specifications, and history credits by researching the evolution of technology and its societal impacts. I mentored Tyler personally, and watching him grow was like watching my younger self get the support I'd never had. He didn't have to choose between education and his passion. He could have both, integrated in a way that made sense for his learning style and goals. The resistance to the program was fierce at first. Traditional teachers worried it would devalue regular education. Parents feared their children would be stigmatized as lesser students. The school board faced pressure from colleges about how to evaluate these non-traditional transcripts. But we pushed forward, armed with data and success stories. By the end of that first year, Project Phoenix students had a higher engagement rate, better mental health scores, and more concrete post-graduation plans than their traditional track peers. Tyler had already received job offers from 3 tech companies and had been accepted to MIT's computer science program with a portfolio that impressed admissions officers more than any SAT score could have. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a district-wide assembly where Phoenix students presented their year-end projects. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, parents, and school board members. As I watched from the side of the stage, memories of my own time in these halls flooded back. Tyler presented an app he'd developed to help dyslexic students better engage with reading materials. Maria Santos, our first scholarship recipient, showcased a virtual reality art installation that was being featured in a downtown gallery. Another student, Amanda Chen, definitely no relation to the teacher who cut my hair, demonstrated a small business she'd launched creating custom prosthetics using 3D printing technology. What struck me most was the reaction from traditional track students in the audience. Instead of mockery or dismissal, there was genuine interest and even envy. I heard whispers of, "I wish I could do something like that," and "Why didn't anyone tell me this was an option?" The culture was shifting, right there in that auditorium. After the presentations, Mr. Peterson approached me. He'd become one of the program's most vocal supporters, completely transforming his teaching approach. "You know," he said, "watching these kids present, I keep thinking about all the students I failed over the years. Kids like you who I tried to force into a box. How many innovations did we lose? How many dreams did we kill?" He shook his head but then smiled. "At least we're not making those mistakes anymore. These kids, they're going to change the world, and we're finally getting out of their way to let them do it." The program's success led to national attention. Education Week ran a feature story. The Department of Education sent representatives to study our model. Other districts began reaching out, wanting to implement similar programs. What had started as a personal quest for justice had evolved into a movement that was reshaping how we think about education and success. 3 years into Project Phoenix, we held our first alumni reunion. The hotel ballroom was filled with young people who'd taken the non-traditional track and were now thriving in various fields. There were entrepreneurs, artists, programmers, craftspeople, and yes, even some who'd gone on to traditional colleges with a clear sense of purpose and passion. Tyler gave the keynote address. At 21, he was already a senior developer at a major tech firm while completing his degree part-time. He talked about how Project Phoenix had saved him from dropping out entirely, how it had shown him that his different way of learning wasn't a flaw but a feature. But what really got me was when he thanked the teachers who'd changed their perspectives. He specifically called out Ms. Harrison, who was in attendance. She'd become one of the program's most dedicated advocates, using her podcast to spread awareness and challenge educational orthodoxy. When Tyler acknowledged her transformation and impact, I saw her wipe away tears. The ripple effects continued spreading. Emma, after her gap year teaching coding, had shifted her MIT focus to educational technology. She was developing platforms that could identify and support non-traditional learners earlier in their educational journeys. We talked often about the future of education, dreaming of a world where every student could find their path without shame or struggle. My company, TechBridge Solutions, established a formal partnership with the district. We provided internships, mentorship, and real-world projects for Phoenix students. Other local businesses followed suit. Soon, students had access to experiences in healthcare, finance, manufacturing, arts, and dozens of other fields. The artificial boundary between education and real life was dissolving. One particularly meaningful development was the creation of the Phoenix Parent Network. Parents who'd initially been skeptical began supporting each other as they learned to celebrate their children's non-traditional achievements. They shared resources, celebrated unconventional milestones, and slowly changed the narrative around what parental pride could look like. I attended one of their meetings where a mother named Janet Williams was sharing her story. Her daughter Ruby had always struggled in traditional classes but was a gifted mechanic. Through Project Phoenix, Ruby was apprenticing at a local auto shop while completing modified coursework. Janet talked about learning to see her daughter's grease-stained hands as a sign of meaningful learning, not failure. When my daughter comes home covered in engine oil, talking excitedly about rebuilding a transmission, I see the same light in her eyes that other parents see when their kids talk about acing a test, Janet said. Success doesn't have to look like a report card full of A's. Sometimes it looks like a kid who finally found where they belong. The 5th anniversary of the incident that started it all approached with a mix of reflection and anticipation. The district planned a celebration of how far we'd come. They wanted to hold it in the gymnasium where everything had happened. A full-circle moment that felt both appropriate and surreal. As I prepared my speech for the event, I thought about all the students who'd found their paths through the programs we'd created. The scholarship recipients who were building businesses and pursuing passions. The Phoenix students who were redefining success. The teachers who'd transformed their approaches and opened their minds. But I also thought about the students we hadn't reached yet. The ones still struggling in systems that didn't fit them. The ones being told their dreams weren't valid. The ones sitting in classrooms feeling stupid because they learned differently. There was still so much work to do. The night of the anniversary event, the gymnasium was transformed. Where punch bowls had once stood, there were displays showcasing Phoenix student projects. The walls were covered with success stories, not just academic achievements, but creative works, business launches, innovations, and personal growth journeys. I stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd that included many familiar faces. Emma sat in the front row, now Dr. Emma Williams, having fast-tracked her PhD in educational technology. My parents were there, finally understanding and proud of the path I'd taken. Marcus and my team from TechBridge filled a whole section, cheering loudly before I even began speaking. But it was the presence of Ms. Harrison, Mr. Peterson, and even Ms. Chen that felt most significant. They sat together, no longer the tribunal of judgment they'd once been, but educators who'd learned and grown and changed. The transformation wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. It was the entire community's. 5 years ago, in this very room, I experienced one of the worst days of my life. I began. Teachers I'd once respected physically and emotionally assaulted me for the crime of taking a different path. They poured punch over my head, cut my hair, slapped me, and tried to humiliate me out of existence. They saw my success outside traditional education as a threat to everything they believed in. The room was silent, the weight of history hanging in the air. But what they actually did was light a fire. Not just in me, but in our entire community. They forced us to confront the rigid thinking that was failing so many students. They made us question why we were so invested in one narrow definition of success. They sparked a revolution that has changed thousands of lives. I talked about the students who'd found their voices through our programs, the parents who'd learned to support dreams they didn't understand, the teachers who'd become advocates for change, the community that had rallied around the radical idea that success has many faces. Ms. Harrison stood up when I finished, and for a moment, my heart raced. Some part of me still expecting confrontation. But instead, she started clapping. Slowly, others joined her until the entire gymnasium was on its feet. The woman who tried to destroy me was now leading the applause for what we'd built from that destruction. After the formal program, people mingled, sharing stories and celebrating progress. I found myself in conversation with a group of current Phoenix students who were eager to share their projects and plans. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their creativity boundless, their gratitude profound. One young woman, Keisha Brown, pulled me aside. She was 17, a brilliant writer who'd struggled with traditional English classes but was now publishing poetry and working on her first novel. "Ms. Williams," she said quietly, "I need you to know something. Before Phoenix, I was ready to drop out. I thought I was stupid because I couldn't write the way teachers wanted me to. I thought my stories didn't matter because they didn't fit the 5-paragraph essay format." She pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with her distinctive handwriting. "But then I heard your story. I learned about Phoenix. And suddenly, there was space for me. Space to write the way I write, to tell the stories I need to tell. You saved my life. Not metaphorically. Literally. I was in a dark place, and finding this program, finding my voice, saved me. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the fighting for change. If even one kid found their path because of what we'd built, it was worth it. But it wasn't just one kid. It was hundreds, with thousands more to come. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone in the gymnasium for a moment. The same space where I'd been assaulted now bore testimony to transformation. Where I'd stood dripping with punch, students now displayed their achievements. Where my hair had been cut, mentors now guided young people toward their dreams. Where I'd been slapped and humiliated, we now celebrated diverse forms of success. My phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. He'd been promoted to lead developer and was launching his own startup on the side. "Thanks again for everything," his message read. "None of this would have happened without you fighting for kids like me. Phoenix saved my life too." I thought about the ripple effects of that awful day. How Ms. Harrison's cruelty had led to her own transformation into an advocate. How Mr. Peterson's rigid thinking had evolved into innovative teaching. How Principal Roberts' attempt to throw me out had resulted in policies that welcomed all learners. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalysts for the most important changes. The next phase of our work was already taking shape. We were developing a national model, working with education policymakers to integrate alternative pathways into standard practice. The goal wasn't to replace traditional education, but to expand it, to make room for all kinds of minds and talents and dreams. I'd recently been invited to speak at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, sharing our model with future educators and policymakers. The kid who'd been told she was throwing her life away by leaving high school was now influencing how the next generation of teachers would think about success and failure, potential and achievement. But perhaps the most profound change was in my own perspective. For years after leaving school, I'd carried anger and resentment. I'd hidden my success partly out of self-protection, but also out of spite. I'd wanted to prove them wrong more than I'd wanted to lift others up. The assault had forced me to transform that anger into action, that resentment into reform. Now, when I thought about those teachers, I felt something closer to gratitude. Not for their cruelty, never for that, but for the opportunity their actions had created. They'd broken something that needed to be broken. The myth that there's only one path to success. In trying to humiliate me, they'd humanized the struggles so many students face. In attempting to silence me, they'd amplified my voice and the voices of countless others. A month after the anniversary celebration, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a book titled Transforming Education: Lessons from the Phoenix Project. Ms. Harrison had written it, chronicling not just our programs, but her own journey from rigid enforcer to reform advocate. The dedication read, "To all the students I failed before I learned to see, and to the one whose strength in the face of my weakness changed everything." I sat in my office, holding the book, thinking about the strange paths life takes us down. The woman who'd poured punch over my head had become one of the most effective champions for educational reform. The teachers who'd tried to shame me for dropping out were now helping other students find alternative paths. The school that had tried to exclude me was now a model for inclusive education. My company had grown to over 200 employees across 5 offices. We'd gone public the previous year, and I'd used my newfound wealth to expand our scholarship programs and fund educational initiatives nationwide. But more importantly, we'd maintained our commitment to hiring and developing non-traditional talent. Over 60% of our employees had taken unconventional paths to their careers, and they brought perspectives and innovations that traditional hiring would have missed. Emma called me one evening with exciting news. She just received funding for a major research project using AI to identify and support non-traditional learners from elementary school onward. "If we can catch these kids early," she explained, "before they internalize the message that they're failures, imagine how many more we can help. Imagine a world where being different isn't a disadvantage but a recognized asset from the very beginning." That's the world we were building. One student, one teacher, one school at a time. A world where success could look like a traditional diploma or a thriving business started at 16. Where intelligence could be measured in code written or art created, not just tests passed. Where teachers celebrated diverse paths instead of enforcing single ones. Where parents could be proud of children who colored outside the lines. The impact went beyond education. Other industries were beginning to question their rigid hiring requirements. Why demand a 4-year degree for jobs that required specific skills better learned through experience? Why exclude brilliant minds because they'd taken different paths? The conversation we'd started in one small district was spreading to boardrooms and hiring departments across the country. I often thought about that scared, humiliated girl standing in a gymnasium, covered in punch, missing a chunk of hair, being told she was worthless. I wished I could tell her what would come from that moment. How her humiliation would become hundreds of students' hope. How her assault would lead to systemic change. How her refusal to be ashamed would inspire others to stand proud in their differences. But maybe she knew, somewhere deep down, that this was bigger than just her story. Maybe that's why she'd been able to transform pain into purpose, to use privilege for progress, to turn the worst day into a catalyst for the best changes. Maybe she understood that sometimes we have to be broken open for light to get in, and more importantly, for light to get out and illuminate paths for others. The work continues. Every day brings new challenges, new students who don't fit the mold, new teachers learning to expand their vision, new parents learning to support dreams they don't understand, but also new successes, new innovations, new proof that human potential can't be confined to single paths or standard measurements. Recently, I was back at Westfield High for another event. As I walked through the halls, I passed Ms. Harrison's classroom. She was teaching, but it looked nothing like the rigid rows and stern lectures I remembered. Students were working in groups, some on laptops, others building something with their hands. One girl sketching in the corner while listening to music. The walls were covered not with rules and warnings, but with diverse success stories and inspirational quotes about multiple intelligences and varied paths. She caught my eye through the doorway and smiled. A genuine warm smile so different from the contempt I'd once seen on her face. She'd invited me to speak to her class later that week about entrepreneurship and alternative education. The woman who'd once embodied everything wrong with rigid educational thinking had become one of its most effective reformers. That's the power of transformation. Not just individual change, but systemic evolution. What started with one girl refusing to be ashamed of her choices had become a movement reshaping how we think about education, success, and human potential. The ripples continue spreading, reaching students and teachers and communities far beyond our small district. I think about all the kids out there who are being told they're not enough because they don't fit the standard mold. The ones crying over homework that makes no sense to them while building incredible things in their spare time. The ones being labeled as failures because they can't sit still for 7 hours, but could revolutionize industries if given the chance. The ones whose talents are invisible in traditional classrooms, but could shine brilliantly in the right environment. For them, we keep pushing. We keep expanding what's possible. We keep proving that success has many faces, that intelligence has many forms, that potential can bloom in the most unexpected ways. We keep building bridges where there were walls, creating possibilities where there were only limitations, making space where there was only judgment. And sometimes, late at night in my office, looking out at the city lights and thinking about all the young people out there trying to find their paths, I allow myself a moment of pride, not just in what I've built, but in what we've all built together. A community that learned to see beyond its assumptions, teachers who learned to celebrate difference, a system that learned to bend instead of break, students who learned they could succeed without conforming. The girl who was humiliated in that gymnasium might not have imagined this outcome, but she knew, even covered in punch and missing hair and stinging from slaps, that her worth wasn't determined by their narrow definitions. She knew her path was valid even if they couldn't see it. She knew that someday, somehow, she would use her success to make sure no other kid had to endure what she did. And now, years later, that promise is being kept. Every scholarship awarded, every Phoenix student graduating, every teacher changing their approach, every parent learning to support unconventional dreams, every policy reformed to be more inclusive, it all stems from that moment when they tried to break someone who refused to be broken. The journey from humiliation to transformation, from assault to advocacy, from exclusion to inclusion, has been long and often difficult, but it's also been profoundly meaningful. Because in the end, it was never just about me or my success. It was about every kid who's ever been told they're not enough. It was about every dreamer who's been forced to defend their dreams. It was about every person who's taken a different path and been punished for it. For all of them, we've built something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. A system with more room to breathe, more paths to walk, more ways to succeed. A community that celebrates diverse achievements. Teachers who see potential in all its forms, and most importantly, students who know that their dreams are valid, whatever shape they take. That's the legacy of that awful day in the gymnasium. Not the punch or the scissors or the slaps, but the transformation that followed. The proof that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for the most important changes we make. The demonstration that one person's refusal to be ashamed can inspire systemic evolution. So to anyone reading this who's been told their path isn't valid, who's been mocked for their choices, who's been made to feel less than because they don't fit the standard mold, your journey matters. Your dreams are real. Your potential is limitless, even if others can't see it yet. And sometimes, the very people who try to tear you down will end up clearing the path for your greatest triumphs. Keep walking your path. Keep believing in your vision. Keep refusing to let others' limitations become your own. Because you never know. Your worst day might just be the beginning of changes that transform not just your life, but the lives of countless others who come after you. Your pain might become someone else's possibility. Your struggle might become someone else's strength. Your refusal to be diminished might become someone else's permission to shine. That's what happened to me in that gymnasium. They tried to humiliate me into hiding, but instead they catapulted me into purpose. They tried to shame me into silence, but instead they gave me a story that would change lives. They tried to prove I was worthless, but instead they proved that worth can't be measured by their narrow standards. And now, every time a student finds their path through our programs, every time a teacher expands their definition of success, every time a parent celebrates an unconventional achievement, every time a dreamer refuses to give up their dreams, that moment in the gymnasium is redeemed again. The punch is washed away by tears of joy. The missing hair is replaced by heads held high. The slap is softened by applause for achievements no one saw coming. This is how we change the world, not through grand gestures or perfect plans, but through the messy, painful, beautiful process of turning our wounds into wisdom, our struggles into systems that support others, our worst moments into catalysts for change. It's not easy. It's not clean. It's not without cost, but it's worth it. Every student who finds their path makes it worth it. Every dream that's allowed to flourish makes it worth it. Every life that's changed makes it worth it. So, thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening to this story, for understanding why every detail matters. Because this isn't just my story, it's the story of everyone who's ever been told they're not enough. It's the story of everyone who's ever taken a different path. It's the story of everyone who's ever refused to let others' limitations define their potential. And most importantly, it's the story of how we can transform education, expand success, and create space for every kind of brilliance to shine. One student at a time, one teacher at a time, one school at a time, one story at a time, until the day comes when no student has to choose between their dreams and their dignity, between their path and acceptance, between who they are and who others think they should be. That day isn't here yet, but it's coming. And every time someone reads this story and thinks maybe my path is valid too, we get a little closer. Every time a teacher questions their assumptions, we get a little closer. Every time a parent supports a dream they don't understand, we get a little closer. Every time a student refuses to be ashamed of who they are, we get a little closer. So let's keep going. Let's keep building. Let's keep transforming. Let's keep proving that success has many faces, that potential has many forms, that education has many paths. Let's keep turning worst days into catalysts for change, humiliation into fuel for transformation, assault into advocacy for others. Because in the end, that's how we win. Not by proving our worth to those who refuse to see it, but by creating systems where everyone's worth is recognized. Not by conforming to narrow definitions, but by expanding those definitions until there's room for everyone. Not by hiding our differences, but by celebrating them as the sources of innovation and progress they truly are. The girl covered in punch in that gymnasium didn't know she was starting a revolution. She just knew she wouldn't let them break her. But sometimes that's all it takes. One person refusing to be broken. One moment of standing firm when everything says fall. One choice to transform pain into purpose. And then the ripples spread and the changes come, and the world shifts just a little bit more toward justice, toward inclusion, toward recognition of all the beautiful ways humans can succeed. That's my story. That's our story. That's the story of everyone who's ever taken a different path and changed the world because of it. May it inspire you to walk your own path proudly. May it give you courage when others try to dim your light. And may it remind you that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the beginning of the most important work we'll ever do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this ongoing transformation. Together, we're building a world with room for every kind of success, every kind of intelligence, every kind of dream. And that world, that beautiful, inclusive, expansive world, is worth every moment of struggle it takes to create it. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, if you're still here with me after all these words and all these memories, then you understand. You understand that some stories need to be told in full. Some journeys need to be walked completely. Some transformations need to be witnessed from beginning to wherever we are now, knowing the end hasn't come yet because the work continues. So let's continue it together. Let's keep writing this story of transformation. Let's keep proving that there's no one right way to succeed, no single path to fulfillment, no universal timeline for achievement. Let's keep making space for the dreamers, the different ones, the ones who color outside the lines, because they're the ones who will paint us a better future if we just give them the chance. And someday, maybe someday soon, a student will walk into a school and be celebrated for exactly who they are, supported in exactly the path that's right for them, encouraged to dream in exactly the way they dream best. And they'll never know the pain of being told they're not enough. They'll never experience the humiliation of being punished for being different. They'll never have to hide their success to protect others' egos. That's the world we're building. That's the legacy of that terrible day in the gymnasium. That's the proof that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the seeds of the most beautiful transformations, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of everyone who comes after us. So here's to the dropouts who became CEOs, to the failures who became innovators, to the ones who didn't fit who ended up changing the shape of the box, to the teachers who learned to see differently, to the parents who learned to support dreams they didn't understand, to the students who refused to be ashamed of their differences, to everyone who's ever taken a different path and lit the way for others. This is our story. This is our victory. This is our ongoing revolution. And it all started with a girl, some punch, and the refusal to be broken. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. Just one person saying, no, this isn't right, and I'm going to do something about it. Just one moment of transforming humiliation into determination. Just one choice to use pain as fuel for change. That choice is available to all of us, every day. Whatever our worst moments have been, whatever humiliations we've endured, whatever paths we've taken that others said were wrong, we can transform them. We can use them. We can turn them into bridges for others to cross. We can make them matter by making them serve a purpose greater than our own pain. That's what this whole journey has taught me. That's what I hope you take from this story. Not just that I built a successful company despite dropping out of high school. Not just that teachers who assaulted me became advocates for change. Not just that a school system transformed its approach to education. But that every single one of us has the power to turn our worst moments into catalysts for change. Our deepest pain into our greatest purpose. Our most profound rejections into revolutions that reshape the world. So, whatever you're facing, whatever path you're walking, whatever others are saying about your choices, remember this story. Remember that sometimes the people who try to tear you down are actually setting you up for your greatest triumphs. Remember that success comes in many forms. Remember that your worth isn't determined by anyone else's narrow definitions. And most importantly, remember that you have the power to transform whatever happens to you into something that serves others. You have the ability to turn your wounds into wisdom, your struggles into strength, your different path into a highway for others who come after you. That's the real message here. That's the real victory. Not that I proved my teachers wrong, but that together we proved there's room for everyone to succeed. Not that I got revenge, but that I got the chance to create change. Not that I overcame humiliation, but that I transformed it into hope for others. And if I can do that, if a scared girl covered in punch can become a voice for educational reform, then imagine what you can do. Imagine what we can all do when we stop letting others' limitations become our own. Imagine the world we can build when we make room for every kind of brilliance to shine.